So this panel is going to focus through the lens of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, on what school sports and robotics teams can learn from each other. We're going to learn a little bit more about FIRST, the organization that was highlighted in the video. FIRST is a global robotics community that prepares young people for a future, and it is not only the world's largest and leading youth-serving STEM nonprofit, but really probably one of the most positive atmospheres and experiences anybody can have, participant, mentor, or fan. So let's explore here at Project Play what we can all benefit from as the 3.2 million participants since 1989 have done with FIRST. So Chris, I'm going to ask you to get started here. Describe cooperation and its importance to FIRST.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for highlighting FIRST through the video. I'm Chris Moore. I'm the CEO of FIRST. And FIRST was created to solve one very important problem. And that problem is this, is that we are raising a generation of young people who are not going into engineering careers. And in fact, there are about 150 to 200,000 engineers who graduate from American colleges and universities every year, and you compare that to, say, China, whose colleges and universities graduate somewhere on the order of 1.3 to 1.4 million engineers every year. So our founder, 34 years ago, his name is Dean Kamen, who I believe is the Thomas Edison of our generation. He holds over 1,100 patents. Said, I'm going to create a sport, and I'm going to call that sport FIRST. Our sport is going to be a, quote, sport for the mind. It's a sport where science, technology, engineering, and mathematics will be celebrated like, say, sports and entertainment. And so we created this sport where we got teachers excited to mentor a team or coach a team after 3 o'clock. We recruited mentors from some of the leading corporations and nonprofit organizations, DoD, NASA, Boeing, and the like, to mentor a team. The parents and volunteers and coaches all coming together to create this electrifying atmosphere. And so FIRST was born 36 years ago. And among our core values or ethos is this concept of cooperation. It's this notion that you can compete on a playing field while at the same time cooperating with the other teams. And as you might imagine, when you're building a robot, as our students do every season, something always goes wrong. And unlike traditional sports, FIRST teams actually, through cooperation, will help out the other team if they're having a problem with their robot. And so that's really the genesis of our cooperation model.
So we are so fortunate here to be joined by Lexi. She is a dual sport competitor at San Jose's Pioneer High School and also co-captain of the Apes of Wrath. I'll let her tell a little bit more about herself, but we've just heard from Chris describe cooperation. Would love to hear you share with the audience an example of that in action.
Yeah, so I'm Lexi. I'm a high school senior at Pioneer High School, like Ward said. I'm a varsity starter for the Pioneer High School girls water polo team, and that's kind of what I do in the fall. And then following that, I am the president of the Team 668, the Apes of Wrath. So one example of cooperation that I really experienced is pretty much what you've just said, is teams helping other teams succeed, which you don't really see as much in competitive like athletic sports. So at competition, there's kind of two sections. There's like the actual field where you compete with the robots, and then there's the pits, which is like where the robot pit crews go to fix their robots. Things happen all the time. Arms will break off the robots, like crazy things happen. So you need to bring it back to the pit and kind of provide those repairs. And you can't always prepare for everything. So if you don't bring the tools, the correct tools that you need, other teams will actually provide it for you. So you'll go and ask the pit admin, like the people who run the pit, to send out a call for maybe a specific gear you don't have or a specific Allen wrench that you forgot to bring, and teams will come running up and provide those tools for you. And that's really unique because that doesn't happen in athletic sports as much, where people are helping you succeed in competing against them, which I think is really cool.
No, I mean, for those of you that might have seen one of the past seasons of Drive to Survive on Netflix, and you think about the pits at a Formula One race, this is about a 180 in terms of the positivity and cooperation that, again, Chris and Lexi both described. Cody, let's turn to you. I mean, you, again, we were sitting next to somebody like Lexi, a student, an athlete, an aspiring astronaut and engineer, and you are doing this work at the frontier of human potential. Can you share a little bit more about your background and why it relates to people like Lexi?
Yeah, absolutely. So background-wise, I've been spending about almost 2 decades now working on that kind of frontier conversation that you mentioned, astronauts in space. But I kind of have a secondary life that kind of smashed together with that, which was training professional athletes, special forces operators, etc. And so part of the conversation that Lexi and I had before this was we've had about 150 interns flow through our lab in the last 8 years, and we really try and talk about this, how to develop a holistic human. We develop human tech, particularly inside of our lab, and because of that, we want to be able to make sure these technologies are understanding your own physiology, understanding your own psychology, and that kind of connectome between everyone else. And so, as we talked about, a lot of these individuals come in with just an engineering background. How do we get them into that human performance subset? How do we get them to appreciate how, for instance, we talked about the 5 lines of code that made infinite scroll on your phone. How do I get an engineer to understand how I'm introducing these psychological attention-stealing moments to the point of this cooperation? It's not necessarily ingrained in us, right? We are thinking about getting to that problem and to that solution. We hate saying that. We want to be able to talk about tools because every tool that we make has a new host of problems, and therefore it could require us to reach beyond and find these other kind of unique individuals that have different lenses. And that's, I think, a critical aspect of something like what Lexi offers is I've got this background in sport and I understand the competition conversation, but I've got this background in robotics and I can start to merge those two worlds together where hopefully we're not being in a competition to be necessarily the best roboticist team, but how can we lift the entire human race by the fact that we can work together collectively?
Love it. So we wanted to get a sense from the audience here. How many people, if you could raise your hand, have ever attended a robotics competition? Opportunity here, Chris.
Yeah.
So Lexi and Chris, for those that didn't raise their hands, can you describe a little bit more in detail about the atmosphere and what you think traditional sports can learn from these competitions?
Well, first of all, I joined FIRST nearly 4 years ago, and I was absolutely floored the first time that I attended a regional competition, which was a big competition, because FIRST works kind of like sports, where teams compete at the local level, go on to regional play, and then they punch their ticket and advance to the FIRST World Championship. And so when I had the opportunity to attend Worlds, as we call it, World Championship, where we have teams from close to 70 countries who are competing. And by the way, FIRST is in over 110 countries. I just spent the week in Asia last week, and I'm still jet lagged. But the atmosphere is absolutely energetic. It's exciting. It's math. It demystifies this notion that STEM is a science fair. And sadly, a lot of young people shy away from pursuing careers in STEM because they believe that math is too hard or that science is too unapproachable or too distant. And so the FIRST environment, the FIRST championship environment is like the World Cup combined with the WWE combined with the Super Bowl. So we have the parents, the teams, the grandma, the mentors, sponsors of those teams, the participants themselves. And just to give you an idea, we hosted our championship in Houston last year, 55,000 people who filled up the George R. Brown Convention Center. And it was just an electrifying experience. And oh, by the way, Taylor Swift was just up the road. We had more folks at our event than she had at her concert.
Nice. Lexi, anything to add there?
Yeah, so to me it's kind of like part science fair, part sporting event, sports competition, and part like party. And you've kind of touched on all those points. The science fair, my favorite part is going around and seeing how other teams kind of tackled the same challenge that we did, but have a completely different result. And they spent the same 6 weeks, for me, like 30 hours a week on the same, trying to complete the same challenges, but they're just completely different. And I think that's really interesting to see that path and how we took different paths. And then sports competition, we're trying to win, right? Similar to water polo in that sense. And there's cheering, there's refs, there's red cards if you've done some bad things on the field. And then party, like there's dancing, there's singing, people are there to have fun. Like that's the main aspect, especially for my team, is that we're there to have fun as well as learn. And some of the similarities, I think, to water polo is that you can't really succeed unless you work with the entire team, right? Like in water polo, there's 6 positions. If people aren't doing well in their positions, we might not do well as a team, and that's kind of the same in robotics. So yeah, I think they're different and similar.
So a few weeks ago when we got together, Chris, you described FIRST as a sport where everyone can turn pro, which I think really, I mean, it was a great framing. So I want to ask Cody, visionary leader in this space with a truly out-of-this-world background in aerospace, ME, neuroscience. When you see this kind of assembled group of youth leaders and change makers, how can they infuse more STEM into their missions?
This is a question I thought a lot about, and I want to try and summarize it in kind of 3 type points. So the first, we like to talk about the human as a sensor in our lab, and the conversation of how do I see myself not just as an N of 1, but this interconnected individual to this giant ecosystem. So I think, again, to the point of the competition that you're in with this cooperation, I get this ability to see my individual value, but also the depth of interconnection that I have to have. And I think that exploration that kids can get into with playing with sensors and trying new things on themselves is a very interesting stepwise function for that. The second piece is kind of this resilience dialogue, right? We're not trying to make ourselves capable of being perfect, but being more anti-fragile. And so there's a experiment that's going around on the internet right now, kind of from 1954, talking about these rats who were trying to swim to stay alive. And if you gave them, basically a minute break right before they would have drowned, they're able to do almost 4 or 5 times as much. And so in these moments, can we be those mentors, those people to reach out in order to kind of build that depth of resilience? And the last piece I think about it then is, if I've got this human as a sensor and I've got this resilience, how are these students trying to themselves pull that next generation with them, right? We've gotten into these mentalities of saying, I'm going to use kids as a workhorse, the intern of what interns mean. How do we flip that paradigm around where I'm not trying to pull cheap work, but I'm trying to give you as much value as I possibly can, such that we can build some of these skills to a higher fruition and therefore hopefully change societal structure as to how we like to think about teams and how do we like to think about taking care of young people.
Thank you, Cody. So Lexi, we just have a bit of time left, and I'll ask Chris and Cody to jump in. But we want to direct the last question to you because, again, ultimately, Project Play is about the youth and, again, amazing talents like yourself. How can we all help young athletes understand that they have more capacity beyond their sport?
I think it kind of begins with building confidence. If you don't have the confidence and that you can kind of succeed in things that you like, it's really difficult to kind of progress through that. So I think building confidence, and the way that we could do that is starting young, I think. So one example is I lead an FLL team, and if you don't know what that is, it's like First Lego League is what it stands for, and it's my team is 4, I think they're 3rd or 4th graders, and I just kind of lead them through a robotics season, and they build with Legos. So they're kind of they're exploring their interest with something they know, which is Legos. And we're kind of like building things in. So like maybe here's a lesson on sensors. Like we kind of put little lessons of science and math and other robotics things in there so they can kind of get exposed to that. And something else that can help with that exposure, which is really interesting, is like YouTubers. So for example, Mark Rober, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him. He makes videos that are so entertaining you don't really realize that they're about science and math until he goes into the science and math. Like he has things connected to sports. He made a field goal kicker robot. And so there's a lot of overlap there and potential for people who are interested in athletics to bridge the gap and come over to STEM, because a lot of times people see them on different sides of the spectrum, but they share a lot of qualities. Like, you have to be able to be good at teamwork. You have to be resilient. Like, we fail so much in robotics. We fail all the time. And so if you're able to get back up and keep working, which is kind of expected of you in both robotics and sports, you're going to be able to succeed in either way, even if you don't know, like, have any information on it or any knowledge of that area to start out with. So I think it starts with exposure.
Chris? Yeah, I was just going to build on that. I mean, at first, we are trying to create the next generation of kids who are going to solve all of tomorrow's problems. Technology is rapidly changing. Who would have known 10 years ago or 20 years ago that we'd be in this AI revolution? Well, we need more kids in science and technology fields now more than ever to be able to solve tomorrow's problems. And at first, we like to say that we don't use kids to build robots, but we use robots to build kids. And what that means is that we are teaching kids not only the technical skills they need to be successful in civil engineering or mechanical or electrical or software engineering, coding, but all the soft skills, social emotional learning. We're teaching kids how to think critically, how to think strategically. So many first kids are out there developing a strategy, they're planning, they are raising funds, they're advocating for themselves. We take kids to Capitol Hill to meet with Congress, they're members of their Congress and Senate delegation. And so we're teaching them how to be well-rounded young people to be able to solve tomorrow's problems. And so when we say that first is the sport where every kid can go pro, unlike traditional sports where less than 0.5% of athletes actually make it to the pros, what we mean is that there are you don't have to be 7 feet tall like in basketball. You don't have to be 300 pounds like in football. Every student who goes through first can actually fill one of the 2.5 to 3 million jobs that are open right now because our country is in a talent shortage right now. Not a job shortage, but a talent shortage. And last I checked, the NFL or MLB or NBA doesn't have about 3 million jobs open.
Well, again, I know we're here up on time, but it sounds like we have a lot of promise, Cody, that you're going to have a lot of future colleagues, coming to knock on your door very soon. And again, if we have more Lexis of the world, clearly, America and humanity has a lot of promise and optimism. So I want to thank all of these panelists for a conversation that was far too brief. For those locals who didn't raise their hand in terms of her attending a robotics competition, a small plug. Lexi and her team of the Apes of Wrath will be competing at the Berkeley High Regional Championships in early April, so check that out on the... And thank you all for engaging on a session that, again, was, I think, really, really positive. And in the spirit of taking talk to action here at Project Play, I want to conclude the session with an announcement from my friend Brian Finegan, the founder of Anthropy Partners. Brian, come on out.